So our third snippet is going to look at the ratification debates, which are a critically important aspect of the Constitution. And I think too often there's a tendency to think of the Constitution as the document that is prepared in this building in Philadelphia, and then it's written, and we get to 1787, and then we have a Constitution. But that, of course, is not the case. The Rakoff piece that we had for this week's reading talks about this idea of ratification and Madison's vision of a Constitution as sort of creating a sacrosanct document, a document that would be different from just a normal law, by sending the document to the people and having the people ratify. And all 13 states ultimately will ratify the Constitution. Rhode Island, very, very late in the game. Generally through either through special bodies of a constitutional convention that's elected by the people for that purpose, occasionally by the state legislature. Now, in 5 states, Georgia, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania, the Federalists, as they come to be known, these are the supporters of adopting the Constitution as written, are very well organized and get very, very quick votes in favor of adopting the Constitution. In 4 of these states, they just sort of breeze through overwhelmingly. Georgia, Delaware, New Jersey, and Connecticut. In the 5th state, however, Pennsylvania, there's some considerable debate. James Wilson emerges, the man here on the screen, emerges as the most prominent Federalist in the state of Pennsylvania. In the Pennsylvania ratification debate, he tries to explain the Constitution. The Wilson appearances begin a practice in which the people who were at the Constitutional Convention themselves, even though they supported the Constitution, often describe specific provisions of the Constitution in slightly different ways. Wilson seems to envision a quite robust federal government. The Pennsylvania Convention, nonetheless, overwhelmingly supports adoption of the Constitution, but there is a minority report prepared that is designed to influence debate in other states that had not yet voted. The Pennsylvania Minority Report expresses concern about the House of Representatives. It wants a more responsive House, and this is a big issue in the ratification debates. Will the National Congress be responsive enough to the people that they elect? And the Pennsylvania minority says no. First of all, they say that there aren't enough members in the House of Representatives, and so the districts will be too large. If you have a district where there are 50,000 people who are electing a member of Congress, how can that person know, be responsive to the entire district? They also want annual elections. They're worried that members of Congress will get elected and will go down to Washington, D.C. and do terrible laws, and it won't be easy to get them. They want a more robust state system. So here they want no limitation on, very little limitation on state power, and they want a weak federal judiciary as well. So the battle between Wilson, strong federal government, Pennsylvania minority, who becomes the first prominent document produced by the anti-federalist, weak federal government, is one of the key elements in the federalist anti-federalist debate. There's also, and this is a critical aspect of the Pennsylvania ratification debate, the Pennsylvania anti-federalists, borrowing of this argument that's offered pseudonymously by the federal farmer, seizes on the fact that the Constitution does not have a Bill of Rights, and they say, look, this is what we learned from the Revolutionary War. We need to have a system in which the rights of the people are explicitly detailed and the powers of the government are checked. Wilson argues we don't need a Bill of Rights because the nature of the Constitution is that only the powers that are expressly allocated to the federal government, that's it. That's all the federal government has. Anything else the states have. And the federal farmer points out correctly, look at Article 1, Section 9. So that provides a limitation on suspending the writ of habeas corpus. So if you're arrested, you can produce a document saying the charges have to be laid out. Article 1, Section 9 says that no bill of attainder or ex post facto law can be passed. A bill of attainder is a law that's designed to punish, an individual person. So, like in the current Congress, if Congress passed a law saying that Donald Trump Jr. Had to pay taxes of $5 million, but no one else had this tax bill, that would be a bill of attainder. An ex post facto law is a law that punishes previous events. So let's say we had a law that that said that attending CUNY was a criminal offense and you'd be arrested, and that we're going to make this retroactive to 2018. So you have a system where people would have committed a criminal offense, would have no knowledge of that. The Constitution says you can't do that, and it says you can't have any titles of nobility in Congress. And so what the federal farmer says is, look, Wilson's argument makes no sense. Wilson is saying that you don't need a Bill of Rights because nothing in the Constitution, there's no powers except for what's expressly identified. If that were the case, what explains these provisions in Article 1, Section 9, which expressly say things that Congress under no circumstances can't do? So one of the effects of the Pennsylvania debate is to give sort of more wind to the argument that was made by George Mason, right here on the screen, at the Constitutional Convention, that the lack of a Bill of Rights is a fundamental flaw of the Constitution. And so what the framers, what the Federalists had hoped, was that they'd get these quick early passages overwhelmingly in a whole bunch of states, and that would kind of tip down all of the rest, because some of these more recalcitrant states would say, look, 5, 6, 7 states have adopted, we need to adopt too, or else we're going to be left behind. And that doesn't quite happen because, in the aftermath of the Pennsylvania debate, there's a much more focused attention on the concept of the Bill of Rights. And that becomes clear in the Massachusetts ratification debate, which is presided over by this man, John Hancock, signer of the Declaration of Independence, the wealthiest person in the state of Massachusetts, the on-again, off-again governor of the state. Basically a supporter of the Constitution, but someone who, can sort of see the way the political winds are blowing. And Hancock makes clear that he will not support the Constitution, and the Massachusetts will not support the Constitution unless there is a Bill of Rights. And it is that commitment by the framers that they will introduce a Bill of Rights as amendments to the Constitution that persuades the Massachusetts ratification convention relatively narrowly. There are around 350 members of the Massachusetts convention, and the margin is only around 20 in favor of ratification, but it does get through under that proviso. And that will be the case in a lot of these middle states, New Hampshire, for instance, as well, and ultimately the big two, which are Virginia and New York. So the Massachusetts Compromise leads to, we have Maryland, we have New Hampshire, we have South Carolina, but still the most populous states, New York and Virginia, have not ratified. And there's a fear that if they don't, the country will be clearly divided. And New York seems to have a lot of advantages for the opponents. They choose to hold their convention not in New York City, which is perceived as too pro-federalist, but instead in this relatively small rural town, Poughkeepsie, around 2 hours north of New York now by train, somewhat isolated area. The anti-federalists are a little stronger in rural areas than urban areas, so it's an environment that's more comfortable for the anti-federalists. It is, you can sort of see from this description here, this is not an urban hotbed. It's a very out of the way place. The New York Convention is relatively small. There are 59 delegates who attend, and the early signs in New York suggest that there will be that a majority are actually sympathetic to the anti-federalists. The governor of New York, sort of playing the role of Hancock in the Massachusetts debate, is this guy, George Clinton. Clinton leans towards the Constitution, but not aggressively so. And Melancton Smith is another sort of major New York politician who's kind of maneuvering between the two sides. It's a very, very close state. It's not at all clear how it's going to play out. And in our next and final snippet, we'll look at the effects of the New York ratification debate.